Hello, welcome to the Maya Toolbelt. This is Michael. Here at the Toolbelt, we do try to make videos going over everything in Maya, including the small stuff. So this video is going to be a little bit of a smaller one. Just want to go over one of the utility nodes you can find within the Hypershade. I like to use the Hypershade as a kind of viewport window. The way to do that is to go to the Panels menu, under Panel, and then simply choose the Hypershade like this. And it makes your entire viewport turn into the Hypershade, and you can dock the channel box by clicking the tab over here on the right. You can see I have a viewport here docked into my Hypershade, and I also have the material viewer window also closed for now. But otherwise the Hypershade's pretty much the same as it always has been. So the utility I wanted to look at today is under the Utilities category right here in the Create area. And we have this simple one called RGB to HSV. If I left click on it, it creates this utility node. Let's zoom in on it and take a look at it. And we can also see its properties here in the property editor. So RGB to HSV. So RGB stands for red, green, and blue. And any sort of color value that you choose within Maya has an RGB value. And HSV stands for hue, saturation, and value. Value in this case meaning brightness. So for example, over here in the property editor, it says in RGB and out HSV. And you can see the RGB is this color swatch with a slider, and then out HSV are these three values for hue, saturation, and value. So if I left click on this box, the black box, I can choose a color. And you can see here I can choose this little pull down menu, and I can change the HSV here to be RGB, for example. And you can choose two different kinds of RGB values to show, either the 0 to 1, where the left side of the slider is 0 and the right side is 1, or 0 to 255, where the left side is 0 and the right is all the way up to 255. Photoshop, for example, uses the 0 to 255 range for showing colors as RGB values there. So if you're familiar with that, you might want to choose RGB 0 to 255. So what you do here is you simply choose a color, and what would happen is, if I just pick one at random here and say OK, you can see what happens is it takes that color in and it gives you the HSV value that's associated with that color. If I left click on this again, you can see 1361, 129, and if I choose HSV, it shows me 215.3, 0.898, 0.504. That's the three values that we're getting here under the out HSV values. So why would that be useful or important? You don't have to just choose a color. You can also choose a texture, for example. So let me just go over here to 2D textures, and let's choose from the list a file. So I'm going to choose a texture that I have to browse my computer to find. So I'm going to click on the file node, and over here with the little yellow folder, I'll click and browse to find a texture to use or an image to use. Okay, so I've chosen the $100 or $500 bill image I used for a previous tutorial, just to use that as an example. So the out color here, I'm going to click and drag that into the in RGB over here in the RGB to HSV utility, like so. Now when I look at the utility node, I'm getting in RGB here, and my out HSV, you'll notice, are 000. So what I need to do actually is plug this into a different material. So let's look for a surface material, and I'll just create a blend, for example. So the out HSV I can plug into the color, for example, and then the result that we get, let me click and create a plane just to apply our texture to. Now I'll minimize click the blend onto the plane like this. So you can see what we're getting here are the HSV values from that $500 bill image. So that image here, if I were to click on the solo, you can see this is the actual texture image that we're getting. Is all those RGB values of every single pixel on that image are being fed into this utility to convert them into the HSV values for them, and then we're plugging that into the color of the blend here, and we're getting this kind of crazy result here. So that's just one example of something you can do with this. So we're converting those every single pixel on there is being converted into the HSV value, and then we're plugging that into the color, for example, of this blend. So you might be wondering, well, why is the HSV value giving such a different result than the simple texture that we started with? Because those RGB values are equivalent to the HSV values, right? Well, that might be true. However, we're getting HSV values for every pixel, and then we're plugging that into the color, which is, if I click on it here, an RGB value. So it's looking for RGB numbers, and we're giving it HSV numbers. That's what's happening. And so when you plug in those HSV numbers but use them as RGB values, it gives us this kind of pinkish result, pink and orange result, based on this original image that we started with. So while it's true that when you click a color, if I just click here in this box and I can choose a color, like this blue that we had earlier, and let's say it's RGB 0 to 255, we get this result. But I can just click down here to HSV, and here's the numbers that are the equivalent to that color. However, they're not the same. Obviously, this is the RGB value here. So it's going to be either these numbers or these numbers to make that color. However, we're giving it these numbers, which are the HSV values. And so when you plug in those HSV numbers into an attribute that's expecting RGB numbers, then the colors are definitely a lot different. So I don't know how practical that is, but that's what's happening though. That's what this node does, is converting RGB values into the HSV value of those numbers. And then you can plug that into whatever you want to that accepts those kinds of values. This is a vector value, which means it has 3 numbers associated with it, so it needs to be another vector value like color that will accept the output of this utility. So really the only real reason to do that is that from what I understand, some effects are easier to calculate with HSV values than they are with RGB values. So it just depends on what you need. You can use this utility node to easily convert any RGB value into an HSV value depending on the needs of your project. But that's what it does though, the RGB to HSV utility node. Hope you enjoyed the video, learned a little bit. If you have any suggestions for uses of this that you've come across, please feel free to comment and let us all know. We can definitely learn more from other people's use of this utility as well. Again, thanks for watching, and I will talk to you all later.